James had always admired Lucy's contagious energy. From their first meeting, he was enchanted by her radiant smile and the way she seemed to face life with such ease. Luce was a personal trainer, a profession that perfectly matched her vibrant and lively personality. The two met on one of those ordinary days that suddenly become memorable. He, at 32, was in that phase where he was trying to convince himself that yoga was a good idea to relieve work stress. She, at 28, was covering a class at the last minute for a friend. When Luce entered the room, as soon as she began to speak, with that calm yet lively voice, he realized that this class would be different. Luce had a unique way of guiding people. She seemed to see each person there, as if she knew exactly what they needed to hear. It was impossible not to feel at ease around her. Outside that studio, Luce was a mix of energy and serenity that James had never seen before. She talked about plants as if they were old friends, knew the names of all the trees in the park, and had a seemingly endless tea collection. Her apartment was a reflection of her, full of life, with warm colours, books scattered around, and a corner dedicated to her workouts, where she tested new exercise sequences. James, who until then thought his life was all about projects and deadlines, found himself intrigued by that woman who seemed to find beauty in the simplest things. However, there were moments when Luce became quieter, more introspective. James noticed it but attributed it to the natural fatigue of someone with such an active routine. She sometimes cancelled plans at the last minute or went days without sharing much about her work or activities. James respected this space, believing that everyone needs moments of introspection. He knew that behind that contagious energy was a person who also needed time for herself. And in a way, this only made her more interesting to him. It was as if she held little secrets he had yet to discover. What started with a coffee after class turned into conversations that lasted late into the night, weekend trips to places neither of them knew. Luce had a special talent for turning the ordinary into something special, and James gradually allowed himself to enter that rhythm. She would drag him on walks in the park, he would take her to art exhibitions, he helped her assemble furniture for the apartment. It was a constant exchange, a balance that neither of them had planned, but which seemed to make perfect sense. And so, without rushing, their relationship was built. After 6 months of dating, Luce finally invited James to a family dinner. She lived alone, but her family resided in a house on the outskirts of the city. James was excited about the invitation, eager to meet the people who had raised someone as special as Luce. On the day of the dinner, they drove for about an hour until they arrived at a charming 2-story house with a beautiful garden in the front. Luce seemed a bit nervous, something unusual for her, but James attributed it to the natural anxiety of introducing her boyfriend to the family. Upon entering, they were warmly welcomed by Luce's parents, Carlos and Marta, and her older sister Camilla. The house had a cozy atmosphere, with family photos scattered across the walls and the aroma of homemade food coming from the kitchen. The dinner started off relaxed. Luce's family was warm and welcoming, making James feel immediately at ease. They shared funny stories from Luce's childhood, and James was delighted to see a side of her he hadn't known before. While helping to clear the table after the meal, Camilla, Luce's sister, made a comment that would change everything. "I'm so happy you found someone, Lou. You deserve all the support, especially with the challenges you face every day." James, confused, looked at Luce, who suddenly seemed to have lost all the colour in her face. "What challenges?" he asked, genuinely curious. The silence that followed was deafening. Luce looked at her parents, who nodded encouragingly, and then at James. With tears in her eyes, she finally spoke. "James, there's something I need to tell you. Can we talk outside?" They sat down and she said, "Love, I have an illness, multiple sclerosis." The revelation hit like a bomb. James felt as if the ground had disappeared from beneath his feet. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind in a matter of seconds. How had he not noticed that she had an illness? Why hadn't she told him before? Was it serious? He then said, "But what kind of illness is that? What are your symptoms? Please explain to me. Luce, seeing the confusion on his face, began to explain with a trembling voice. Multiple sclerosis is an unpredictable disease. Some days I feel fine, like you see me most of the time. I can work normally, exercise, live my life. But on other days, she paused, taking a deep breath. On other days, I face extreme fatigue, muscle weakness, and sometimes even difficulty walking. James listened in silence, trying to process it all. Suddenly, several small details began to make sense. The days when she was quieter, the times she cancelled plans at the last minute, the moments she seemed distant. Why didn't you tell me before? James finally managed to ask, his voice a mixture of shock and concern. Luce looked at him, her eyes filled with vulnerability that James had never seen before. I was afraid, she admitted, of you leaving me. I've been through this before, and I just wanted to live a love that was genuine, that didn't pity me or run away. Luce had been through this and knew well what it was like. Unfortunately, many women are abandoned by their partners when they face health problems. She had felt firsthand the loneliness that the illness brought. James took her hand, noticing for the first time a slight tremor he had never perceived before. Luce, I love you for who you are, not for the image I created of you, he said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. But I need you to understand that relationships are built on trust. We need to be honest with each other, even when it's hard. Luce nodded, wiping away the tears. I know, and I'm sorry. I promise that from now on I will be completely honest with you. About everything. In the days that followed, Luce began to open up more about her journey. She told James about the diagnosis, which came when she was 24, shortly after finishing her degree in physical education. At the time, she was at the peak of her physical condition, competing in marathons and planning to open her own training studio. The diagnosis was a devastating blow. I spent months in denial, she confessed. I didn't want to believe that my body, which had always been my greatest source of pride, could betray me like that. I felt betrayed by life. She also shared about the end of her previous relationship, when her ex-boyfriend couldn't handle the news. He said he didn't know if he could support me, she said with tears in her eyes. And I understood, but it hurt me deeply. I was afraid that you would react the same way. Forgive me. Luce explained how the illness affected her daily life. Some days, she woke up feeling invincible, ready to face the world. Other days, she could barely get out of bed, her legs heavy as lead and her vision blurry. The disease was unpredictable, and that scared her more than anything else. She underwent regular treatment with medications that helped control the symptoms, but there was no cure. At every medical appointment, I hear the same advice. You need to learn to listen to your body. But I hate that idea. Listening to my body means admitting it has limits, and I don't want limits. I want to live. James, although still processing everything, promised to support her. He started researching multiple sclerosis, reading medical articles and accounts from other patients. He accompanied Luce to one of her medical appointments, asking questions and trying to better understand how he could support her. As time went on, James began to see Luce in a new light. He realized that the strength he so admired in her went far beyond the physical. It was an inner strength, a resilience that allowed her to face each day with a smile, even when her body was fighting against her. A year after that fateful dinner, James and Luce were sitting on the couch in their new shared apartment, watching a movie. It was a quiet night, the kind they had both learned to appreciate. James looked at Luce, noticing how relaxed and at peace she seemed. He took her hand, feeling the familiar warmth that always comforted him. You know, he said softly, sometimes I think about that night, the dinner with your family. If I had known then what I know now. Luce turned to him, a look of concern crossing her face. Would you do anything different? James smiled, gently squeezing her hand. "Yes," he replied. "I would have hugged you tighter and told you immediately that nothing would change between us, that I loved you exactly as you were, with all your strengths and vulnerabilities." Lucy's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of happiness. "You've done much more than that," she said. "You showed me what true love is. It's not about perfection or having a life without challenges. It's about choosing to stay, even when things get tough." James pulled her closer, wrapping her in his arms. "And I would choose you 1,000 times more," he whispered. In that moment, wrapped in each other's warmth, James and Luce knew they had found something rare and precious. A love that wasn't daunted by challenges, that grew stronger through hardships. Their journey wouldn't always be easy. There would be days of struggle, moments of doubt and fear, but there would also be joy, growth, and a deep connection that only strengthened with each obstacle overcome. Together they were rewriting their own love story, a story of acceptance, overcoming, and above all, the transformative power of true love. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.